Imagine waking up one morning and realizing something bizarre. You're not who you think you are. Not in the way your friends, family, or colleagues know you, but in the very essence of you. Because here's the thing, what you consider your identity, that solid, continuous I that has persisted from childhood to now, is not a fixed thing at all. It's more like a movie being projected in your mind. And you're the star who thinks they're watching reality, but really you're watching a carefully constructed story that your brain is improvising on the fly. I know that sounds unsettling, but it's also profoundly exciting. Think about it. Every thought you've ever had, every memory you cling to, every decision you've made is filtered, stitched, and interpreted by an organ that has never actually touched the outside world. Your brain doesn't know what reality is. It only knows patterns of electricity coming from your senses. And from those signals, it assembles a coherent narrative, a believable world, and a believable you inside that world. Here's an analogy. Imagine a painter standing in a pitch-dark room, tasked with painting a landscape they can't see. They have tiny threads of information, a hint of wind, a muffled sound, a faint smell of flowers. Using these scraps, they construct a landscape in their mind, then paint it on a canvas. That painting becomes their reality. That's your brain, all the time, creating your experience of the world. Now let's talk about the you in this story. When you think about yourself, you probably picture a continuous thread. Yesterday's you, last year's you, the child you once were, all connected in a single line. But consider this, your body is constantly changing. Your skin replaces itself. Your gut cells turn over. Even the atoms in your neurons shift over time. In a sense, you are a dynamic pattern, a flow of matter and energy that your brain has learned to recognize as you. And that recognition is clever. It's adaptive. If you suddenly felt like a completely new person every week, life would be unbearable. Your brain has invented continuity, the feeling that you are the same person from one moment to the next, even though physically the stuff of you is changing all the time. Continuity is a story, not a static fact. Let's zoom in on perception. You might think that seeing is simple. Light enters the eyes, travels to the brain, and voila, you see the world. But in reality, what you perceive is never raw light. Your brain is constantly guessing what's out there and updating its guesses as new information arrives. It's like reading a book in a language you only half understand and filling in missing words so the story makes sense. Sometimes it gets it wrong, sometimes it's spectacularly accurate, but the experience is seamless. That's perception, controlled improvisation. And it's not just vision. Sound, taste, touch, even time itself. Your experience of all of them is a construction. For example, ever notice how a familiar song can make you feel nostalgia so vividly it almost hurts? That feeling isn't in the song itself. It's in your brain's reconstruction, layering memory, expectation, and emotion on top of the sound waves. Your subjective world is always your brain's best guess, built from fragments of reality and your own internal narrative. Here's where it gets even stranger. Your brain doesn't just construct the world. It constructs the you in that world. You feel like a central character with agency, making choices, acting on intentions, controlling your body. But much of that agency is an after-the-fact narrative your brain creates. Decisions are often made unconsciously. Your interpreter, let's call it the storyteller part of your brain, observes the outcome and invents a reason, a justification that feels true. This is why you can confidently explain why you bought a certain car, liked a certain person, or avoided a specific place, even if the real causes were subtle cues, instincts, or unconscious processes. To illustrate, imagine a pianist playing a piece perfectly from memory. They don't consciously think about each note. Their fingers move automatically. Yet, after finishing, they might describe their choices as deliberate and planned. The story they tell themselves afterward is coherent, logical, and satisfying, but it's a post hoc explanation. That's you all the time. Your life is a series of actions observed and narrated by the storyteller in your head, often divorced from the underlying processes that actually drive those actions. Now, let's explore memory. Memory feels like a vault of facts. You remember your first day of school, a birthday party, or a vacation. But memory isn't a recording device, it's reconstructive. Each time you recall an event, your brain rebuilds it from fragments, sights, sounds, smells, emotions, context. Every reconstruction slightly changes the memory. You aren't just remembering, you're rewriting. Which means your own past is a living story, evolving as you evolve. In a very literal sense, your history is being co-authored by the present version of you, and every retelling reshapes what you think you experienced. Here's a fascinating implication. If identity is a story, it can be edited. Your brain isn't stuck with the same narrative forever. Therapy, meditation, learning, new experiences, all of these can rewire the story. You can change your self-image, your habits, even the way you experience emotions. In a way, you're not just reading the story of you, you are its co-author, and sometimes its editor-in-chief. But why does the brain do all this? Evolutionarily, it makes sense. A creature that thinks it is continuous, coherent, and self-aware can plan for the future, learn from the past, navigate social relationships, and survive in a complex world. The sense of self isn't a luxury, it's a survival mechanism. The illusion of continuity gives you stability. The construction of agency gives you confidence. The interpretation of your actions gives you meaning. You're not being tricked to annoy you. Your brain is doing the best it can to keep you alive, effective, and motivated. Now let's get even more mind-bending. Imagine splitting your brain in two, literally. In the real world, doctors have done this to treat severe epilepsy. Suddenly, the two hemispheres can't communicate directly. Each hemisphere experiences the world independently, yet still appears to maintain a single you to the outside world. Experiments with split-brain patients reveal that one hemisphere can act in ways the other doesn't understand. And the left hemisphere, the one responsible for language, will instantly make up a story to explain actions it didn't initiate. It doesn't matter that the story isn't accurate. The brain demands coherence. It can't tolerate mystery in the narrative of self. Think about that. Even when confronted with evidence that you might not be unified, the brain creates unity anyway. Your sense of being a single, continuous person is a triumph of storytelling, not a guarantee of reality. This is why humans are so confident, even when we don't understand what's happening inside us. We have an interpreter running constantly, telling us a version of truth that is comprehensible, coherent, and convincing, even when it's partially fictional. Let's turn to identity over time. You've heard of the Ship of Theseus, right? A ship has every plank replaced over decades. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine this applies to you. Every cell, every molecule, even some neural proteins in your brain are replaced regularly. You are literally recycled matter, continuously updated by the flow of the universe. Yet you feel like the same person. That continuity is not in the atoms, it's in the pattern, the structure, the process. You are not a thing. You are a process, a dynamic system, a flow of information that maintains its coherence despite constant turnover. You are more like a fire than a rock, ever-changing matter but persistent pattern. Now, I want to give you a more visceral example. Imagine a river whirlpool. Water rushes in, swirls around, and flows out. The water itself is never the same, but the whirlpool maintains its shape, its rotation, its identity as a whirlpool. You are the whirlpool. Your body and brain are the water, constantly changing, but the pattern, the flow, the experience of you persists. And that persistence is fragile. A single disease, injury, or extreme stress can shatter the pattern, and suddenly continuity dissolves. There are cases in neurology where patients lose the ability to form new memories or their sense of self fragments. Yet even in those cases, remnants of identity persist, reconstructed from the tiniest threads of memory, instinct, or narrative. The brain is remarkably resilient in maintaining the illusion of self even under extreme conditions. Here's another curious fact. Our brains are constantly predicting, not just perceiving, Every moment, your brain anticipates the next sound, sight, or movement. What you feel, see, and think is largely shaped by what your brain expects to happen, updated continuously by feedback. That means your experience of reality is partly constructed before it even arrives. You live in a predictive simulation your brain runs in real time. And the you experiencing that simulation is itself a character in the simulation. It's perception squared. You, seeing yourself, perceive the world, all built on guesses and models. And here's where it gets poetic. You are a universe observing itself. Your brain, made of matter and energy that obeys physical laws, is capable of reflecting, imagining, and narrating. You are a pattern of matter that thinks about patterns of matter. The story of you emerges from the interactions of atoms obeying simple rules, yet producing something astonishingly complex: consciousness, self-awareness, and narrative. It's not magic, it's physics and biology, but it is magical in its implications. So, if the self is a story, the question becomes, who is reading it and who is writing it? You are both reader and character, editor and protagonist, observer and observed. That's the strangeness of being human. You are an ongoing achievement of your nervous system, a pattern maintained through feedback, prediction, memory, and storytelling. Your continuity is a triumph of emergent complexity. The brain builds you in real time, constantly updating, constantly improvising, and you live inside the result. So, we've established that you are a dynamic story, a pattern, a constantly updated narrative constructed by your brain. But let's take this further. If your sense of self is a construction, what does that mean for consciousness itself? What is it really that experiences all of this? Let's start with an analogy. Imagine a computer simulation of a forest. Trees grow, rivers flow, animals wander. Now imagine a camera inside the simulation observing the world. That camera captures everything, but it's still part of the simulation. Consciousness is a bit like that camera. It is a pattern within a physical system. Your brain observing and interpreting other patterns. It is not separate from the processes it observes. It is the process observing itself. And that's astonishing. Your awareness, the sense of I am experiencing this, arises entirely from matter following the laws of physics. Every thought, every feeling, every aha moment is the result of neurons firing, ions moving across membranes, neurotransmitters binding to receptors. No magic soul required. Yet from that physical substrate emerges something qualitatively different, subjective experience, something it feels like to be you, something it feels like to watch the sunrise, taste chocolate, or wonder about your own existence. Here's a question to ponder. If your brain is constantly predicting, constantly making up explanations, constantly constructing reality and identity, then what does free will mean? Are you really making choices, or are you improvising along a script your brain has generated unconsciously? Consider a simple example. You decide to lift your arm. Neuroscientists have measured brain activity leading up to voluntary movements, and they've found that your brain decides to lift your arm a fraction of a second before you consciously feel the decision. Your sense of deciding is an after-the-fact story. You think, I chose to lift my arm, but the neurons had already begun the process. Free will, in this view, is a narrative woven by your brain, a story that gives coherence to your actions. But don't panic. That doesn't mean you're powerless or that life is meaningless. It means your sense of agency is part of the story, and the story matters. The brain's interpretation gives your actions meaning, purpose, and context. Even if the origin of the action was unconscious, the narrative you construct can influence future choices, habits, and growth. You act, your brain explains, you learn, you evolve. That loop is the engine of life. Let's talk about memory again, because this is where identity and consciousness really intersect. We often assume that memory is static, a record of past events. But in reality, it's an evolving reconstruction. Every time you recall something, you rebuild it, influenced by your current state, your emotions, your beliefs, and even the environment around you. That means your past is alive. Your story of who you are yesterday is not identical to what actually happened. It is a version filtered through today's perspective. This has radical implications. Imagine someone recalling a childhood memory of being scolded. In that memory, they feel shame and fear. But as an adult, reflecting on it with empathy, the same memory can evoke understanding or even humor. You are not the same person remembering the same event. Your narrative, your identity, is not fixed. It is fluid, evolving with time, context, and perspective. The self is never frozen. It is always in motion. Now let's push this even further with a thought experiment. Imagine you could gradually replace every neuron in your brain with an artificial equivalent, perfectly replicating the function of each cell. One by one, the original neurons are gone, replaced by machines performing the same computations. The patterns remain the same. The processes continue. The narrative of you persists. At what point, if any, does you cease to exist? The atoms may change, the substrate may change, but the pattern, the story, the continuity of self could survive. This thought experiment reveals something profound. Identity is not about material, but about organization and information. It's the pattern that matters. You are less a collection of molecules and more a computation, a flow of information that sustains itself over time. The brain is a physical engine producing the self, and the self is an emergent phenomenon, a story that arises from matter but is not reducible to it. Now let's talk about extremes. What happens when the system breaks down? Neurology is full of mind-bending examples. There are patients who lose the ability to form new memories entirely. There are cases of dissociation where people feel as if they are watching themselves from outside their body. There are conditions where multiple selves seem to exist within one skull. In each case, the continuity of identity can fracture, revealing how fragile and constructed it really is. Yet even in these states, some patterns persist, habits, instincts, reactions that hint at the resilience of the emergent self. And yet, your brain works tirelessly to preserve the illusion of unity. Even when your experiences are ambiguous, conflicting, or incomplete, the storyteller inside you invents explanations that feel coherent. That is the interpreter at work, taking raw experiences, incomplete memories, unconscious impulses, and spinning them into a narrative that feels like truth. You experience life as a story because the brain refuses to tolerate mystery in the narrative of self. Here's another layer. Your sense of self is deeply social. From early childhood, your brain observes others, models their minds, predicts their behavior, and incorporates their expectations into your own identity. You are not only a story in your head, you are a story in a network of stories, intertwined with other minds. Your brain constantly edits you based on how others respond, creating a feedback loop between self-perception and social perception. And it doesn't stop there. Our brains are predictive machines, remember? So your sense of self is also future-oriented. You constantly simulate scenarios, anticipate outcomes, imagine possibilities. The you are now includes potential futures, not just the present or the past. You are a story in progress, an unfolding narrative constantly informed by experience, imagination, and expectation. Now imagine this on a cosmic scale. You are a pattern of matter and energy arising from atoms recycled through stars, soil, water, and air. You are a whirlpool of the universe, thinking about the universe, wondering why it exists, why you exist, why you feel like you feel. Your brain is a physical system, obeying physics and chemistry, yet capable of producing a subjective universe inside your skull. This is not a trivial fact. It is a profound miracle of complexity. And here's the final twist. Knowing all this, the constructed self, the predictive brain, the interpreter making up stories, doesn't diminish your experience. If anything, it enhances it. You realize that your identity is a masterpiece of emergent patterns, a flowing narrative that has survived billions of chemical reactions, thousands of moments of experience, and the constant turnover of matter in your body. You are a process that has learned to reflect on itself a story that can contemplate its own creation. You are a universe looking at itself through the lens of matter and wondering, who am I? So the next time you feel a stable you, remember, it's a construction, a pattern, a story told by your brain. And yet it is real in the only way that matters, real enough to make decisions, fall in love, laugh, cry, and dream. Real enough to experience wonder at sunsets, music, and the sheer strangeness of existence. Real enough to ponder your own being and feel awe at the complexity that produced it. In the end, the self is not a fixed entity. It is a living narrative, a dynamic computation, a process that emerges from the interactions of atoms and neurons. You are not a thing that exists. You are a process that continues. And that continuation, that story, that shimmering pattern of consciousness is one of the most remarkable phenomena in the universe. So the question is not just who are you? The question is, how do you exist as a story, as a process, as a pattern in a universe that never stops changing? And when you truly understand that, when you feel the thrill of being a conscious pattern constantly rewritten yet remarkably persistent, you start to see life in a profoundly new way, as an ongoing act of creation by you, of you. And perhaps that is the most astonishing thing of all, that in a universe governed by laws, probabilities, and chaos, consciousness emerges, identity emerges, you emerge. And in that emergence, in that delicate, ever-shifting, ever-flowing story, lies the mystery, the beauty, and the wonder of existence itself.